So we're going to transition just a little bit now. We've had a lot of the medical stuff, and we've had a lot of requests to talk about the emotional side of heart surgery recovery. And I had several people I talked to and tried to line them up. And a new friend of mine, Julie, had posted an article from the Star Tribune that Randy Furst wrote about his emotional recovery from his heart surgery. And I was so moved by that I Googled the Star Tribune page. I found his email address and sent him an email, and we got connected. So he's going to come and talk with us now for a little bit, and then after his talk, we've got some survivors. We've got 3 survivors who will share their story. While we're here, and it's completely voluntary, if you are a survivor post-surgery, will you please stand up in the room? Post-surgery survivors. And again, completely voluntary. Those in the room that are in the, as we call it, the watch and wait years. Is there anybody in the room in watch and wait? Okay, and without further ado, Randy has spent most of his 45-year career at the Minneapolis Star Tribune and later at the combined Star Tribune as a general assignment reporter. He's been nominated 4 times for the Pulitzer Prize for a series on the condition of migrant workers, questions regarding the innocence of 2 black men convicted of rape, the arrest of 3 Northwest Airline pilots for drinking and flying, and the exposure of a rogue Metro gang strike force, which was forced to disband, and he was a finalist twice. So with no further ado, Randy, thanks for being here.
Thank you, Amy. It's really been an incredible conference. Great music from your husband, too. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for inviting me. And I'm listed on the advertising program as a survivor. Well, I am a survivor, thanks to the great work of the doctors and surgeons at the Minneapolis Heart Institute, like you folks who spoke here today. My cardiologist is Rob Schwartz, an absolutely terrific cardiologist, and I can't say enough great things about him. And also the great members of the Minnesota Nurses Association who looked after me night and day for 9 days. They were only a button ring away, and the great rehab people who helped me get me back into shape. And especially to the survivors, I've got to tell you, and I'll get into it later, but other people who've gone through the same thing that I have gone through have been very important to my recovery, and I'm very grateful for that. And it's a pleasure to be here. I feel a little out of my league. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a medical reporter. I've worked at the Star Tribune actually 47 years. I went on the computer to see how many articles I've written where I mentioned open heart surgery, and the computer search covered 34 of those years. And all that time I've mentioned open surgery twice. Once when I wrote an obituary, and the other time when I wrote this article for the Star Tribune in December. And if you missed it, you can find it pretty easily on the internet. Just Google the words heart and my name, Randy Furst, and Star Tribune. You don't have to subscribe to get the article, but if you do subscribe, you won't object. We need the readers. It got actually a huge reaction, more than anything that I have done since I actually did that article about a series of articles about rogue police about a dozen years ago. Several hours after it was posted on the internet, I got an email from one of the presidential candidates talking to me about the article, kind of thanking me for writing the article. They said that they were writing from New Hampshire. I emailed them back saying, New Hampshire? What are you doing in New Hampshire? So anyways, a lot of reaction. As Amy pointed out, my journalism has been more focused on things like police corruption and slumlords and racial inequities. So writing about open heart surgery was really the last thing on my mind when I got wheeled into the operating room at the Minneapolis Heart Institute on August 26th last year. The anesthesiologist later told me that they inject you twice. The first time is to calm you down so you will forget. Because I guess, well, you saw at one point there was a picture there, this big operating room, and it apparently scares the heck out of a lot of people. And so anyway, I was very calm in that process. It was good. A few weeks after the surgery, I started mulling the idea of writing about the experience. I remember walking back into the Star Tribune, and I was greeted by several of the assignment editors, and they said what a lot of people have been saying to me. They said, "You look great," and I'm thinking, I don't feel great. In fact, I felt disoriented, and I felt physically weak, and I just did not feel like my old self. And that's when I started contemplating writing about this experience. My surgeon was a 69-year-old doctor by the name of Fraser Eels. Fraser Eels. Kind of sounds like a surgeon, doesn't it? Fraser Eels. Very respected surgeon. Did a wonderful job. Shortly after my surgery, Dr. Eels' office sent a letter to Health Partners, which administers leaves of absences for the Star Tribune. They sent me a copy of the letter at my request, and here's what it said. It said, quote, "Our Furst underwent open heart surgery on August 26, 2019. He will require 12 weeks to recover, both physically and emotionally, and will need assistance in all activities of daily living." Well, physically, I could understand that, but emotionally, what the heck was that all about? I mean, they didn't operate on my brain. And it took me a few weeks to begin to understand what was going on. I remember the sort of existential crisis a couple weeks after the operation. I'm standing in the kitchen of my house, staring at a plate on an upper shelf, just like this, and wondering, how am I going to reach it? I mean, physically, it was, as most of you know, once after the operation, they wire your chest back together, and you cannot reach above your shoulders for a few weeks, unless you want to experience excruciating pain. So I remember the overwhelming sense of powerlessness when I would pick up a box of dishwasher soap, and it felt like a ton. I mean, or the daunting effort to lift a pot of water. It contained only a quart of water. It's very humbling. Like most everyone else, I did the post-op rehab. I was working out at the Fairview Cardiac Rehabilitation Services in Edina. Great place. Staff is really nice to you. It's a wonderful place. I was on one of the treadmills at the rehab center, and I'd be looking around at everyone else on the treadmills and the recumbent bikes, and I saw a lot of morose faces. And when you talk to people, especially the newcomers, a lot of them were not in a good mood. And I didn't want to talk to anybody. And I talked to a few others and found that they were going through what I was going through. So I pitched the idea of doing an article about recovering from my open heart surgery to my editors, in particular the health and science editor, Courtney Kim. And she liked it right away. Her own father had had heart surgery, and he had not had a good time of it, so she was really interested. So I came back to the Star Tribune about 8 weeks after the surgery last October, still recovering, and spent the next 5 weeks reporting and writing this story. And it was really a great fun. I got to interview my own surgeon and my own cardiologist, and I talked to other surgeons. I interviewed the anesthesiologist who put me under, and a nurse who took care of me, and my primary doctor who oversaw my care afterwards. I interviewed the professionals responsible for my rehab, a counselor who counsels people who have post-op depression. I talked to a psychologist who studies people who have medical issues, including major surgery. I even got to watch a real open heart surgery in process, thanks to the Minneapolis Heart Institute. I watched surgeon Tom Flavin, is that how you pronounce it, Flavin? Flavin. He held a heart in his hand and turned it over. I mean, I was only 3 feet away, just behind a curtain. There wasn't a lot of blood. At one point, Dr. Flavin did a puncture that he said could cause a spurt of blood, and he told me to back up. He just didn't want me to get sprayed, he said. So there was no spray, it was okay. But the key thing that I did in my reporting was to talk to people like you, some of the other people here who've gone through the surgery. And I was asking them, what has it been like for you? What's it been like? Were you having the same feelings I had? How's your recovery going? I think one of the things I discovered is that when we are recovering, it is helpful to talk to other people like ourselves, which is one of the great things about this conference. I mean, it's not a gripe session, but kind of an exchange of information. And I just found it very, very helpful to hear from people like me what they are going through, what they're feeling. And for a lot of us, it's feeling overwhelmed. I've got an adult son, for example, who likes to pour out issues with me. He's a great guy, I enjoyed talking to him. But I was only home from the hospital for a day or so, and he came over to chat. He was going on, and I couldn't handle it. I didn't say that to him, I listened. But in these early days of recovery, it was tough. I was barely coping myself. I was talking to another open heart patient, and she was telling me a similar experience. She teaches at a university, and she had students hitting her up with questions a couple of weeks after surgery. It was just too much for her, she said. And I interviewed a psychology professor at the University of Minnesota, a guy named William Robiner, and he told me this, a quote, "When the body is not feeling great, the mind is not far behind," unquote. So essentially, we need time to heal, and we get impatient, and I certainly get impatient. It's 5 months after the surgery, and I'm still not up to full strength. I'm still impatient. Why is this taking so long? You'd think after all this research that I've done, I'd realize that. But what I've learned is that they say it takes up to a year to feel like your old self. And my family physician, Chris Armstrong, he says that's normal. This emotional roller coaster is typical. He told me now, and I should tell you this, that this was my second round of open heart surgery. In 2015, I had my aortic valve repaired and a portion of my aorta replaced, and Dr. Ziels did that one too. And about 2 months into my recovery, I experienced some depression. I had never suffered depression in my life, ever before. And it was really strange. And I didn't understand it. And my physician, Chris Armstrong, told me it was post-op depression. He said it's common. He said if I don't come out of it, he would prescribe something for it. Well, the depression lifted in about a week. and it did not return, thankfully. So, but it was just an unusual experience. Still, I don't think I fully grasped the psychological impact after that first surgery. I had been married 43 years. My wife had had Alzheimer's for almost 10 years. And she had died suddenly in the summer of 2015. And I loved her so much. It was the worst day of my life. It's probably good for her, but it wasn't good for me. And I spent many months going to grief sessions. And then 4 months after she died, I had open heart surgery. And figuring out the emotional impact of her death and the emotional impact of the surgery was a little hard to separate back then. But I think it's been a little more clear in the second round when I had to replace my mitral valve. As I've learned, serious depression seems to be a major side effect of open heart surgery. As many as 20 to 30% of open heart surgery patients suffer from depression, according to the data. The Fairview rehab program I attended screened for it. When you show up there, you fill out a questionnaire, and a lot of the questions have to do with whether or not you have depression. And they ask you that at the beginning and at the end of the rehab also, after you've been through rehab for a number of months. And I spoke with a counselor at Fairview, and he told me that there are several reasons for the depression. One reason is that some folks are just plain demoralized. They just had the biggest operation of their lives, and they're wondering what's going to happen next. As my cardiologist Rob Schwartz explained to me, for maybe the first time in our lives, we have come face to face with mortality. And we may be asking ourselves, is this the beginning of the end? If that is not depressing enough, some of us are facing critical lifestyle issues that will require change. Some of us may be obese, and I saw folks in rehab like that. We may be compulsive overeaters. We may need to make major changes in what we eat and how much we eat, and some people may feel incapable of making those changes. And I'll tell you, that was not my issue. It used to be. I've been maintaining a 99-pound weight loss for the past 17 years. And that's a story for another day. If you're interested in that, talk to me afterwards or email me at the newspaper. I've written on that subject, too, for the Star Tribune. I wrote a big piece about it 7 years ago. Another reason a person coming out of surgery may feel depressed is that they come from the hospital and there are people at home depending on them. The counselor told me that, and they're overwhelmed by it. They can't handle it, which is totally understandable. I had a long conversation with one woman about the aftermath of her open heart surgery. She'd gone through an awful lot. She was sitting across from me in a coffee shop, and she was crying. She was under tremendous personal stress at the time of the surgery, and it just got all stuffed up inside her. She said to me she had recovered physically, but not emotionally. She found it good just to talk it out. I talked to others who were having a hard time, and others who, with the help of family, were doing quite good. And I certainly found these conversations enervating. Although I've never had group therapy, it felt an awful lot like group therapy. And I think I could have really used a support group after the surgery. My doctor said the medical profession has advanced a lot more in taking care of the physical side of things for patients than it has the emotional side of things. And one doctor told me that I seem to maybe have identified a significant issue, but that dealing with it may be a problem, having group sessions for patients as part of their aftercare, led by a medical professional, could cost significant dollars. And who's going to pay for that? Would a hospital shell out that kind of money? One of the patients that I interviewed was a 44-year-old woman. I had talked to her a couple days before she had the open heart surgery. I interviewed her afterwards in the hospital. She had come back from a rehab session. She'd been walked around the hallways with the nurse who was in charge of rehab for the open heart patients. And the patient was sitting there on the edge of her bed, and I asked, how's the recovery going? And, oh, she's doing really great, said the nurse. And I could see the pained look on the patient's face. And the doctor who performed the surgery stopped in to check on her. And I'm told he's a top-notch surgeon. He told the patient, "You look great. You're doing really well." And again, she kind of was uneasy. And when both of them left, the patient and I chatted. And we agreed that neither the doctor or the nurse seemed to know what she was going through. At that moment, we were sharing something that we both knew because we had been through that experience. As Dr. Ziels, my surgeon, told me when I interviewed him, he said, quote, "Open heart surgery is the most physically traumatic thing that happens to a person in their lives. I don't think you can understand the physical trauma unless you've been through it." He said he hadn't been through it, so he did not fully understand it himself. I should just say as an aside, when I had my first open heart surgery, it was in mid-November, and while I'm in the hospital, one of his colleagues, doctors, comes through to check on me. I asked this doctor, I said, "Do you know Dr. Ziel?" He said, "Yeah, I know him. Yeah, he's a friend of mine." I said, I asked him, I said, I bet all these operations he helps him carve the Thanksgiving turkey. And his colleague says, they don't let him touch the Thanksgiving turkey. He's too clumsy. Yeah, he's a joke. He's a great guy. I just wanted to kind of wind up on a couple things, and that is this. I wanted to tell you that after I went through all of these grief sessions over the loss of my wife for about a year, in 2015 and then in 2016, I started dating. And a year after that, I began dating someone special, and a year after that, she and I got married, and that was in April of 2018. And her name is Rosemary, and she sat in the waiting room the entire time. And she's been a rock of support, rock the heart, rock of support. And I think we've all found that family and a support network can make a huge difference in our recovery. And that's my story. Thank you very much for listening.